I just finished another university sketchbook and then I realized I have 5 unfinished sketchbooks, with the earliest being from 2015. So yeah, basically I told myself I'd finish those 5 sketchbooks first before starting another one, so that they won't stay unfinished forever. Because while I don't think it's a bad thing to have unfinished sketchbooks and just like stop with them, that's not really my style and I'm not about to waste like so much paper. Also, this baby here is the oldest out of the bunch and also the smallest. And I did start it in 2015. It used to be for like concept doodles and sketches and only pencil sketches, like not even color pencils, just normal pencils. So it's a really cheap one. This one is 80 pages, 100 grams. This is supposed to be for ink, like fountain pens? Yeah, like pencil and apparently fountain pens, but it really doesn't work, honestly. It doesn't, no, don't try it. So it's not a bad sketchbook for what I had back then, but if you want to like have a, you know, a proper sketchbook, I guess, would not recommend necessarily. But yeah, there are 13 spreads left in here, so I thought my whole finishing those 5-year-old sketchbooks would be a good idea to start that project with this one. Also to get it out of the way, this is a quick one, so yeah. So yeah, this is a pretty cheap sketchbook. It cannot handle any kind of wet medium, which is fine because it's not supposed to be. But also, usually watercolor or similar mediums are like one of my main art supplies that I like to use in my sketchbooks. However, I don't really mind, because then I'm going to use this sketchbook to get more used to ink and ink pens, gel pens, stuff like that. However, I will not limit myself to only that. Like, if I feel like using colored pencils in here, that's fine. If I want to do watercolors, I can use one of my other sketchbooks. One of the started sketchbooks is a mixed media one, so I can work with watercolors in there. Simply because I don't see any reason to limit myself too much. Like, yes, those 13 spreads, I want to practice ink pens and stuff like that. But, you know, I still want to keep the fun in it. So yeah, my main goals with this are, like I said, getting used to ink pens, gel pens, stuff like that. Like, also just, like, trying them out, because I did play around with them quite a lot, but I've never really, like, actively tried, you know, like, getting used to them, looking up tutorials or something like that. I'm not entirely sure what exactly I'm going to do in here. Maybe I'm going to look up tutorials, I'm going to do studies, I'm just going to play around, whatever I feel like at the day, in the moment. But yeah, I actively want to try to get better. I want to get more confident in my line work, especially with set medium like ink pens and stuff, and also want to practice simplifying things, because I think it's really, really impressive how, for example, comic artists simplify like foliage or stuff like that. So I'm probably going to do studies in here of like some artists as well. And yeah, I also want to bring texture and details into my sketches only with set ink pens. Like I have some Pitt artist pens with various thickness, but overall I think most of my pens are like 0.5 millimeters. And I think it's impressive when people show textures, structure, whatever with line work. So that's something I want to get better at. And in the end of this video, I'm also going to include like a small sketchbook tour of the pages that I finished. So I'm not going to film everything, but you will definitely see all of the pages I finished this time around. So yeah, guess I'm gonna start getting ready to sketch, and I see you at the end. I'm going to be honest with you, this was a tough day in terms of what I managed to get down on paper. It was absolutely noticeable that I'm not used to the medium or paper, and working with those is very different from what I'm used to. However, this kind of taking stock and testing out just how unused I am to this made me look forward to learning and seeing my sketches develop so much more. Another big thing I noticed is that I cannot believe that I used to work in ring-bound sketchbooks. Because oh my god, it was hindering me in putting down my hand properly so much, which made drawing even harder. So I'm glad that I tried using the sketchbook again and that that I filled it up. But also I don't think I'm getting another ring-bound sketchbook anytime soon. My intention with the sketchbook was to finish 2 spreads, aka 4 pages each day, and on this first one I finished the first 3 pages in one go and then started the last one off camera after I came back from my workout. I mostly drew Pinterest references so that I'd be able to fully concentrate on the lines rather than coming up with the picture itself, which was a very good idea. It made it easier to actually notice the way the ink flows or how the way I hold the pen affects the line. It's also just a nice, easy way to ease myself into this without pressuring myself too much. This loose, fun way of exploring the medium works way better for me than having a strict colloquium or something like that. But god, do I still struggle with the non-erasable lines. I have a pretty explorative approach to my art, and my first lines are usually very light to get the dynamic down, and then I add bolder lines on top. But here I really had to get used to setting permanent marks right away. Honestly speaking, there isn't much I'm really proud of on these pages. However, getting the ugly drawings out is a necessary step, and I can also already see the first little developments in my skills here. By the 3rd page, I had to leave to get my workout in, but I was starting to get the hang of it, and there are still certain elements of the pages I like the hair on page 3 and the crinkles on the body on page 1, as well as the pattern on the fallen tree on page 2. One thing I felt more comfortable with than I expected was actually drawing the creases on the clothings. And looking back at the pages, those are also my favorite aspects of these sketches. I noticed I'm focusing more on line weight and textures than when I work with colors, which is something I really like. I'm really curious to see how I'm going to develop over the rest of the week. On day 2, I wanted to use the fact that I've been wanting to check out the art exhibition called Nudes in the Münster Museum for Art and Culture. It's, as the name suggests, about nude paintings and sculptures and themes like their development throughout history and their social impact. I had done an ink spread at home before and on the train, so I allowed myself to use my good old trusted colored pencil for the studies I was planning on doing in the museum. I absolutely loved seeing the different bodies, and especially the painting Ethel Ashtop by Neel was my absolute favorite, and the first one I did a study of. The texture of the painting and the black outlines and the stomach area in general were so captivating to me. But yeah, I had lots of fun in the museum, and especially the shapes were amazing. And honestly, this might have been one of the first times I actually had fun doing figure drawing. Which might also be because the figure drawing classes I usually take focus on gestures and are way faster than the time I spend on these sketches in the museum. But that doesn't matter much. What matters to me is that I think I found a way that studying human anatomy is more fun to me, and I'm excited to fill my figure drawing sketchbook with the few slower sketches in the future. However, I'll still be doing the quick gesture ones when I feel like those benefit my art more, of course. On day 3, I decided to use old fashion magazines, or well, rather fashion catalogs I had lying around as references. I want to up my game in everyday fashion with my characters and also practice interesting poses that are not necessarily action poses. Stuff that I could use, for example, in visual novel sprites or on character sheets. One thing I love about this challenge is that I don't have the time to overthink what to draw or if it's interesting to look at for other people, because my goal is to fill this book and get used to the supplies, not make the most amazing, mind-blowing illustrations I've ever done. Which isn't my goal with sketchbooking anyways, but here even more so than in my other books. It also leads to a more relaxing sketching session. Not that it's not fun to draw things I'm putting more effort in or things that are more challenging than just put down lines, but doing this kind of page feels very freeing every once in a while. So yeah, I decided to focus less on learning and more on simply getting down lines on the paper. And once I did that, which was on like the second page, I did have a small breakthrough. Paying less attention to anatomy led to my lines being more dynamic and loose and generally also quicker. I especially had a lot of fun drawing the outfits and more precisely the folds on the clothing. It also became easier to draw faces because I didn't try to capture every detail, which doesn't really work that well on the small paper anyways, and the simplified features let my individual style come through even more. My main takeaway for the day is basically don't overthink it and simplify to keep the looseness, and it'll look better automatically. By the 4th day, I had properly realized that neither the heavily textured paper nor the particular ink pens I was using were for me. And I was also starting to miss working in colors as well as my usual approach to sketching. So I wanted to bring some kind of connection between my usual approach and the new ink sketches in. And the most fun way for me to do that was to use my light colored pencils to bring my explorative scribbles back, before going in with the decisive ink lines on top. That also worked pretty well because while the ink pen still had trouble with the paper, the cut erase pencils worked very well as a base as long as I didn't put too much pressure on. I was a bit unsure about doing this because I felt a little bit like I was cheating, but I literally told myself in the beginning of this that I could bring in other media if I wanted to, and I was still working with ink. I was just trying to find a way to make the medium work for me. And to be honest, I also really missed my messy colored scribbles under the sketches. Going in straight with ink is for sure a skill, and I really like some of the sketches I made, but for my personal works, the explorative scribbles just bring my sketches to life and feel just way more like me. But the fact that I realized that I'm really not a fan of these particular supplies, well, at least for now, is actually something I'm very happy about. Because it basically means that I'm getting good enough to identify the things I struggle with rather than having one big question mark in my head. Before I was so focused on the sketches and the aspects I wanted to get better in, like just getting used to the ink pens and getting the simplified shapes down, while also implying textures and folds and all the other things on my mind. So that I've gotten to a point where I notice problems that are not necessarily my skills means that I'm comfortable enough to be able to identify other problem areas. Like the fact that the annoying texture on the right side of the pages hinders the ink flow, while the back of the page is smoother. As well as the fact that some of my pens just don't really work for the quick dynamic lines I like to do. I think they need longer contact with the paper, which isn't really my approach to getting the results I want. They also might be running out of ink, but what do I know? Also, another thing, can you please talk about how hot this model is? Because hello? Honestly, I feel like this day was the day I actually reached a point in my development where I could finally identify what I liked and disliked about working with black outlines only, and where I could finally start working towards a more concrete idea of what I want. And the best way for me to do this was doing a little analysis of one of my favorite artists in terms of outlines. The first one who came to mind for me was Feefal, whose art and techniques were still kind of fresh in my mind because I had read her art book recently where she explains a lot of it. I didn't use the art book tutorials for this though, and instead just picked an illustration of hers I really liked. Analyzing her art myself just helps me remember the things I learned in the future. Her color choices and textures and her shadows and other things about her art are also things I'm absolutely in love with, but here I wanted to stay focused on the line art only, which felt kind of weird because I'm not used to ignoring color like this, but it also helped me learn a lot more. For example, I had noticed over the last few days that I liked using line variation and some thicker lines here and there in my art. I mainly do it to imply depth, which Feefal does as well, so I did this study to analyze her art even further. Mind you, I don't want to copy her, I just want to understand the way of working, to get inspired and finding my own way of doing things. For example, I had noticed over the last few days that I liked using line variation and some thicker lines here and there in my own art. I mainly do it to imply depth, which Feefal does as well, so I did the study to analyze her art even further. Mind you, I don't want to copy her, I just wanted to understand her way of working to get inspired and finding my own way of doing things. I took some notes right next to the study just as I noticed different things about her art, and some of my favorite takeaways are that she purposely puts those small breakaway lines on the outside of the object to visually support the flow, and also just how much her lines vary. Like, I love her very thick outlines and how bold she is. I'll probably do some more studies of other artists soon as well, to find even more ways to work with line art. I feel like most of my university classes are more focused on getting rid of outlines, which I get because it forces you to work with contrast and values and other aspects, but man do I love outlines. Even if I prefer doing them towards the end of an illustration instead of after the sketch, but that's just a topic for another time. Day 6 was actually the last day I worked in the sketchbook, which means I finished one day earlier than planned. Yay me! And I used this day to do the thing I said I'd do yesterday, which is study other artists whose line work I love. However, I didn't choose an illustrator like yesterday, but instead I did studies of one of my absolute favorite mangaka, Kamatani Yuhki, and their manga Hiraef. It's a Welsh word, and according to Wikipedia, it means something similar to a homesickness tinged with grief and sadness of the lost or departed, especially in the context of Wales and Welsh culture. It is a mixture of longing, yearning, nostalgia, wistfulness, and an earnest desire for the Wales of the past. The manga itself isn't about Wales or anything, but rather the grief aspect of it, and the art style in this manga captures that feeling very well. So yeah, I analyzed how the mangaka draws things and focused on textures via line work and how they simplify things. These things play a big role in how the mangaka gets the feeling across, and man, they're a god among humans. I wish I could just eat their art and assimilate their skills into mine that way. But yeah, as you see, I'm very normal about this. But yeah, afterwards I did the next page about Shirahama Kamome's hatching and landscape textures in Witchet Atelier, which is another mangaka's work I feel the need to eat in order to steal their skills. But until I find a way to make that work, I guess I'll just keep doing normal studies, like a normal person. Now to bring it back to my own sketches, I would have loved to use a Sharpie for black areas, but the paper really couldn't handle it, so I'll have to do those studies another time in another sketchbook. However, I don't really mind because it forced me to focus on getting textures via hatching or similar things, which is a very educational challenge for me. Once I was done with the studies of those amazing artists, I also played around with the things I learned in my own little scenery sketches. This was one of the pages I had the most fun with in my sketchbook, and I'm absolutely looking forward to doing more of this in the future. As for the last page, I decided to kind of do a little redraw of the first page I did, and oh my god, the difference is so much bigger than I thought it would be in the beginning. But just see for yourself in this little flip through coming up. So it's been a few days since I finished this, and I had the opportunity to like take a little break and look back at these sketches with fresh eyes, and I have to say I'm pretty happy and a little bit surprised about my development, to be honest. Not that I'm like a pro with Inkworks now or anything, but it was very important and also a kind of big thing for me to realize that I'm just not a big fan of the ink flow of the ink pens that I have, and I just prefer the flow of the Muji gel pens that I have. The texture studies from day 6, hold up, like these ones, also really helped me in just realizing what I like and yeah, what I dislike and what I want with my art and how to get it, basically, you know, like especially in textures. And I also had just lots of fun playing around with line weight as well. Actually, the ink brush pen that I have with like, you know, the actual brush tip, that one works really well for like really thick lines or just black areas, like, you know, the dark in here. So once the one I have right now is like properly empty, I'll probably get another one of those. But yeah, generally speaking, I still prefer the gel pens over the ink pens. Going in straight with like non-erasable black ink lines is also like a very good practice to get more decisive line work. Even if I generally don't erase my colored pencil or graphite sketches either, but just the instant boldness of the deep black line and the fact that I can't erase it, you know, they force me to have a more sure approach to this. Like, because even if I don't erase the graphite lines I make, I think it's still in my head that I could technically erase it. So working straight with ink pens, gel pens, ballpoint pens, or anything like that is still very good practice in my opinion, even if you also don't erase your graphite lines or whatever. I also still love looking at like pure ink pen sketches by other people, but I don't think it's something I want to do necessarily, like play around with this kind of stuff for sure. But I honestly just like miss my sketchy, explorative colored pencil lines and the colors. Like, I think it gives so much more life and vibrancy to my own sketches, for my own style, for my own taste. Yeah, I think that's actually something I'm gonna explore more. Like, for example, I like the approach on this page, where I actually put down the colored pencil shapes first, and then connected the shapes with very, well, not here, not so much, but like want to connect them with like very decisive lines. And then only have the two mediums interact and like important focus points or something, because it just brings focus and I don't know, it's just visually more interesting. So that's definitely something I would want to explore more in my sketchbooks. So even though I was really struggling with parts of this sketchbook, I would absolutely call this challenge a success. I mean, especially since my main goal was filling the sketchbook, and I actually did manage to do that one day earlier than planned, but also in terms of developing my art skills. I also want to do this kind of challenge again in the future, because just how well it worked for me, to be honest. Because I think, like, while filling X pages and X amount of days or whatever might sound like it would put more pressure on me, it actually helped me feel less pressured with the sketches themselves. Because since I was more focused on filling the sketchbook, I felt way less precious about the sketches themselves, so I pressured myself less in that area. And that also helped me feel like freer to experiment more, because I didn't care if an experiment wouldn't work out. Like, first of all, these thoughts usually are like subconscious, like I'm not actively sitting there like, oh, this sketch has to be amazing or something, but involuntarily I still, in my subconsciousness, it's like, oh, this sketch is not good enough to be in your sketchbook sometimes, you know? And with this, because my focus was, like I said, on finishing the sketchbook, I didn't really care. Like, it was just like, oh, I'm just going to try something new, and then I did it and it was nice. And if it worked out well, it worked out well. If it didn't, hey, whatever, I'm just going to move on to the next sketch, and at least I filled a page. So like I said, big success. Finally finished this after almost 10 years. And yeah, let me know if you plan on doing something like this as well, or if you maybe have done it already and what your experiences are, because I'm really curious how this works for other people. And now thanks for watching, go drink a cup of water, and see you in the next video.